The first locomotive to be steamed up in New Zealand was one acquired for the Southland Province's 4-foot 8.5-inch gauge wooden railway between Invercargill and Makarewa, 12 kilometres away. The Lady Barclay was built by Hunt and Opie in Ballarat, Australia, and was first steamed on the 8th of August 1863. The second was a 5-foot 3-inch gauge 240 tank locomotive acquired for Canterbury's first railway from Christchurch to Ferrymead. It was first steamed on the 18th of November 1863. Altogether, 18 locomotives were acquired by the three provinces of Auckland, Canterbury and Southland until the era of 3-foot 6-inch gauge railways began in the 1870s under central government control. The first 3-foot 6-inch gauge locomotive was built in 1872. This was an 0440 tank engine named Josephine and known as a double Fairley type. The 040 tank locomotives built by Dubbs and Company and later known as the A-class, were typical of locomotives acquired during the public works era of the 1870s. The most famous of the tank locomotives from this period were the 060 F-class, of which 88 were built. Some were still working into the 1960s. An oddity were the 042 H-class Fell locomotives, which were purpose-built for the famous Rimutaka incline section. Steam, as motive power, wasn't confined to locomotives, as can be seen with this Kitson steam tram. As railways traffic got heavier, so did the locomotives, and tender and bogie locomotives appeared, several coming from the American builders of Rogers and Baldwin. In the 1890s, the series of 262 and 264 tank locomotives, known as the W-class locomotives, appeared. W192, dating from 1889, was the first locomotive built by the NZR workshops. WD357, seen here, is now the only surviving Baldwin-built locomotive in New Zealand. WW and WAB locomotives were the mainstay of services on the west coast of the South Island and the Wellington suburban services. In these scenes, taken in the early 1950s, work is underway on installing catenary on the Hutt Valley lines with the aid of a steam crane. Many of the locomotives from the 19th century disappeared from use before any moving picture film was taken of them. However, accurate recreations of the way they appeared is provided by working scale models, such as those seen in this newsreel footage of the late Frank Roberts' Garden Railway.
This Auckland garden is a little different, for in it Mr. F. Roberts operates his own railway system. It's all in miniature, but the engines and rolling stock are perfect reproductions of NZR types. Mr. Roberts on the right discusses the model's performance with his fellow hobbyist, Mr. Stewart. 45 years' work by Mr. Roberts has gone into this impressive lineup in the tool shed, shunting yards. Every detail of these working models is perfect, and it's hard to realize that this South Island type engine is only about 18 inches long. The cab is a miracle of skill and patience. Even the firebox door opens and shuts. The illusion of reality is helped by the miniature tunnels and viaducts along the line. This WAB tank engine and goods train could almost be on the main trunk as it puffs along fussily through Mr. Roberts' garden. Mr. Roberts operates the trains by remote control from 2 points. The AB engine, of which this is a model, was designed by New Zealand engineers, and the type has since been widely adopted throughout the world. Overseas, it's known as the Pacific. This model is Mr. Roberts' proudest achievement, and it ran over 800 miles at the 1940 Centennial Exhibition in Wellington. Here is the Ada, which pulled the first passenger train out of Auckland. It chugged along between Auckland and Onehunga and was christened with a bottle of champagne by Ada Henderson in 1873. Happy, wasteful days. This puffing billy was the first one out of Wellington. It pulled coaches like these to Te Aro and back, but how long it took to do it isn't recorded. This looks like Gulliver starting a Lilliputian engine, but the original of this and the others were all once used by the New Zealand Railways. It's a unique cavalcade of the Dominion's railway history, for the originals of most of these engines are now on the junk heap. Here is the first engine ever to be built in New Zealand. In its later days, it hauled one coach over short runs and was really the forerunner of the modern rail car. This is a Fairley, a near relation of Dunedin's Josephine, which is still to be seen in the station grounds in Dunedin. An old K, which once pulled the same train as the Josephine, ignores a modern K as it steams past full of self-importance. The old boy's got a history and he knows it. The modern K, which now hauls New Zealand express trains, is Mr. Roberts' biggest steam model. It's a perfect piece of work and will haul several adults. The K goes on its way, one of the latest in a long parade of New Zealand engines. Mr. Roberts, through his hobby, has given New Zealand a permanent and unusual record of a vanishing period in transport history, the day of the Iron Horse.
Following the turn of the century, the first of the compound Pacifics appeared in the form of the A-class, one of which, A423, is seen here climbing Cass Bank in 1970. The ABs first appeared in 1915, proving to be the most numerous NZR locomotive class, with 151 being built. The 262 Type C-class locomotives from 1930 were used for heavy shunting duties in both islands. Here, C864 is seen with an excursion on the Methven branch. NZ steam locomotive power moved into the big league with the 484K class, which appeared on the rails in 1932. The KA class from 1939 was a heavier and more robust version of the K and was probably New Zealand's most famous locomotive class. Also in 1939, 6 KBs were built for the Springfield to Arthur's Pass section of the Midland Line. They were the same as the KAs, but had an extra booster which powered the trailering bogie under the cab at low speeds. Accordingly, they were the most powerful, successful steam locomotive to be used in New Zealand. The following film, made in 1939, shows New Zealand railways at their zenith, just before World War II. Times were prosperous. Travelling by train was the way of getting from place to place, and steam ruled the rails.
In the railway world, most things have their origin in molten metal. From such beginnings come even the great 16-wheeled K-class locomotives which the New Zealand Railways Department builds. Almost the whole of the rolling stock, too, is manufactured in the department's own workshops, where efficiency in management is added to excellent working conditions, bright modern layout, and the latest in machinery. Youth always wants to see the wheels go round, and probably we've all shared this little chap's ambition to drive a railway engine at the head of an express train. The express appeals to the imagination, but it is the plodding goods train that produces most of the railway's revenue. A vast amount of varied merchandise travels by rail, and these extensive goods sheds at Wellington cover many acres. Wellington, the capital city of New Zealand, is the southern terminus of the North Island main trunk line. Picturesquely situated among hills surrounding one of the finest harbors in the world, this port is naturally a very busy place. Here, as at other ports, the railways provide valuable service, especially for New Zealand's chief exports: wool, meat, butter, cheese, and fruit. The Wellington Railway Station is the largest in New Zealand and is a handsome addition to the city's buildings. Express trains hauled by big locomotives of new design and greater power, and the numerous suburban and local trains pant along the long platforms. Here is the terminal for the fast electric multiple units which serve the suburbs to Johnsonville, while fast rail cars of modern design glide in and out on their journeys from and to Taranaki, Hawke's Bay, or the Wairarapa. Truly, modern railway transport is as fascinating as it is useful. At Wellington's passenger station, the Daylight Limited will be preparing for its 400-mile run to Auckland, the northern terminal of the main trunk. I wonder how many greetings and farewells are exchanged on the railway station in the course of a year. New Zealand abounds in rivers, lakes, and mountains, with consequent difficulties for the railway engineer. Bridges range from the 1 1/4 mile span over the wandering Rakaya River to the lofty Makohine Viaduct, and very steep grades have to be climbed. In its journey through the North Island, the train serves many important scenic resorts, including the Tongariro National Park. The Mountain Chateau in the central heights of the island is a popular resort where golf, tennis, tramping and skiing may be enjoyed according to season. feature of railway travel in New Zealand is a provision of refreshments at various stopping stations. Nearing the end of the journey, the Limited slows down at the approach to the city of Auckland. The splendidly equipped modern station of Auckland is the northern terminus of the main trunk service. From here run the trains that serve the subtropic North Auckland district. The city, with its population of 218,000, is noted for its many beautiful parks and also for its two harbours. From Auckland leaves another important train, the Rotorua Express, serving the great thermal region centering on the world-famed spa, where various forms of curative treatment are provided. Valuable as are the hot and cold waters of Rotorua, they are not the only attractions in this region. There are excellent sports grounds and angling facilities, beautiful scenery, and delightful open-air swimming pools. The Maori people, with their picturesque costumes and customs, are another interesting feature of Rotorua. Pleasant-voiced Maori guides conduct visitors safely around the spouting geysers, the pools of boiling water, and the churning cauldrons of mud. And now away to the South Island, where the trains are just as important factors in carrying on the country's business and in helping people to see the scenic beauty of the South. Littleton is the southern port for the Inter-Island Express steamer service, and from here electric trains run to Christchurch, the South Island's largest city. Christchurch, usually considered the most English of New Zealand's cities, stands on the broad sweep of the Canterbury Plains, along which the South Island main trunk trains have about 100 miles of flat country to traverse. Canterbury is the chief wheat-growing area of New Zealand. Pleasant Timaru is the chief town of South Canterbury. Oamaru in North Otago is the next important town on the way south. The train follows the coast to Dunedin, where comes a welcome break for those knights of the Iron Road, the driver and his fireman. Another responsible position is that of signalman, whose manual work, however, is simplified by the modern electrically operated signals. Dunedin, the principal city of Otago province, was founded by Scottish pioneers in 1848, and today is New Zealand's fourth largest city, and still quite Scottish in character. The great ranges of the Southern Alps, lying almost the whole length of the South Island, include countless beautiful peaks, glaciers, and snowfields. Mount Cook, of which the Maori name is Aorangi, is 12,349 feet in height, and in this region is a popular holiday resort, the Hermitage. The Southern Alps are, of course, greatly favored by winter sports enthusiasts, and they have their own charm in summer as well. The Otira Tunnel through the mighty Southern Alps is the longest in the British Empire. In its 5¼ miles, it drops 1,200 feet, and it is approached by the extraordinary staircase, which has 2 tunnels to the mile in its 7 miles length. Westland, and indeed the whole west coast of the South Island, is famed for its beauty of virgin forest and placid lake, famed also for the beautiful Franz Josef and Fox glaciers, which descend into evergreen forest only a few hundred feet above sea level. West Coast, which has abundant deposits of excellent coal, is an important mining area. Indeed, New Zealand is fortunate in having a plentiful supply of coal in various districts, an asset of great value to the railways. Security for the passenger is assured by the most modern safety appliances, a very high standard of track maintenance, and constant vigilance on the part of the staff of 25,600. The tablet is the driver's authority to take his train on to the next station on the track. Tablets are exchanged automatically as the train passes. If the driver does not receive the correct tablet, the train will be stopped immediately. But on the more important sections, a modern three-color light system of control is used. The Railway Department has a passenger steamer on Lake Wakatipu. The first section of railway in New Zealand was built in 1863. The great development of railway services since that year has been necessary for the attainment of the country's present high standard of prosperity.
During World War II, another famous mainline general-purpose locomotive appeared with the Mountain-type 484J and JA classes from 1940. A JA class, number 1274, was the last steam locomotive to be outshopped in New Zealand in 1956. The J and JAs were used in both islands for freight and express passenger trains. At the beginning of the 1950s, changes were in the wind. Electrics had already made their appearance in the 1920s, and now diesels were about to threaten the reign of steam, as these films from 1954 and 1957 report.
Changing engines can mean the familiar but always fascinating operation which allows passengers their well-known 5 minutes for refreshments. For an engine lover, of course, it's refreshment enough just to watch a proper engine like this K-type, 45 tons, with domes, funnels, cylinders, crossheads, connecting rods. All designed and built in New Zealand to haul trains of 1,000 tons. Yes, a real live engine breathing real live steam. Long-lived identities they are too. This little old girl, over 80 years old, is still at work in the docks of Littleton. Soon there won't be so many of these jobs for semi-retired engines, since shunting's being taken over by diesels. Motor lorries on rails, I call them privately, but they're cheap to run and can haul 500 tons or more. Suburban passenger trains seek diesel-electric help until electrification of the line is completed. Where it is complete, multiple unit electric trains are clean, comfortable and speedy. They cruise along at 45, need no coal in the yards, and put no smuts in your eye. They're certainly more handsome than tram cars, the electric units, but to an old railwayman it can be sad to think that our railway workshops that have built so many great engines may build only a few more of their like. It was steam that pioneered the railways, opening up the heart of the country. One of the last batch of 110-ton JAs to be built takes her first look at the world outside the workshops. Meanwhile, in England, something new is on the stocks for the New Zealand railways. Heavy diesel electrics, power stations on wheels. Diesel motor drives the generator that makes the current that drives the axle motors. Not being suited to English gauge lines, the new locomotives can't go to the docks on their own wheels. Instead of railway signals, they pass the winking lights of pedestrian crossings. Arrived and on test on the main trunk, the first diesel-electric proves itself more powerful than an oil-burning KA and cuts costs by a third. With the coming of more efficient power, the JA, like other steam locomotives, will have to take a back seat. EW articulated electrics can give twice the speed of steam on heavy gradients and have about half the running costs. Taking it all in all, old engines will have to admit that the young fellows taking over are more than equal to the job. Rolling out of the Dunedin sheds comes New Zealand's latest steam locomotive, the latest and the last. She was built in '56, and we'll make no more like her, for the days of steam are parting. For many years yet, young boys and old boys will see the big steam engines leaving their trails of smoke behind them, huffing and puffing out history with every turn of their wheels. "50 miles an hour across the plains, and the Red Indians are far behind." Rail cars are the thing today. Except on the main trunk lines of both islands, they've replaced the passenger expresses. With their speed and quick acceleration, they beetle over the steep grades and twisting tracks of our railways. On 9 services from Auckland to the west coast, arrival times for passengers are well ahead of the old-time schedules. Journey's End is the smoke and steam and bustle of the shunting yards. Amid the complicated tangle of rails, engines and wagons, there's a never-ending job. Breaking up trains and putting together new ones goes on night and day. One thing about a fireman's job, it has its compensations in cold weather. Up and down the country, the old engines, the Cs, the WWs and the BBs, push and haul the wagons. But they're wearing out, and diesel shunt engines are taking over. The efficient, economical diesels can work round the clock without stops for fuel and water. As yet, only Wellington's yards have entirely lost their smoke and grime, and perhaps something of their interest for small boys. Carrying is the railway's big business. Fridges and space heaters, bridges and egg beaters are loaded on and off the trucks from Kaikoui to Riverton. Every year there are more and more of them, and to handle the increase, railway yards are being enlarged. Those at Penrose are being trebled in size. Westfields will cover 40 acres. New wagons for the new yards are trucked from shipside to workshop. Prefabs, they are assembled in the local railway shops. 2,300 of these have been ordered, and every one will be needed to deal with the ever-increasing goods traffic. Some are already in use, and they're giving a new look to our changing railways. There are changes in maintenance too. In the diesel sheds, locomotives get the 3-level treatment. Ramps and pits allow mechanics to service the top, middle and bottom at the same time. This new layout cuts down overhaul time and speeds up engine turnaround. This goods train has started the long haul down the North Island from Auckland. It will stop at stations and sidings, pick up bulldozers and razor blades, swap razor blades for sheep and sheep for onion plants, carrying the produce of half the island to the ports. And the tireless diesels will pull the wagons all the way. Between Auckland and Frankton, more double track is being laid. Not so long ago, one of these trains would have to fret impatiently at a station while the other went through. Delays are getting fewer and shorter. Double track, longer passing loops, new signal equipment. All these things are cutting down hold-ups and speeding up service. Moving south, the train comes under the eye of yet another labour saver, a central control station. Centralised traffic control is fairly new. It means that traffic on anything up to 100 miles of track can be controlled by one man. He knows where every train is and what it's doing. If there are any traffic snarls, he untangles them. Through the King Country and south to the Raurimu Spiral. The passenger expresses pant through here at night. It's only the diesel drivers who see beyond the tortuous twists and bends of this fantastic mountain line. Over this switchback track, the diesels come into their own. On steep grades, steam locos can't come near them. Now there are fewer stops for water, and the sound of toiling steam isn't heard so often in the bush. Leaving the spiral behind, the train crosses the flats, then swings over the great viaducts. Passengers on the night expresses may wake, hear the roar of steel on steel, and sleep again, never realizing that they are practically airborne. A lot of country has been left behind as the train moves south towards Wellington, towards the port. The railways are keeping pace with the growth of New Zealand. The hum of the diesels is the sound of progress, ending the steam era on our changing railways.
On the suburban lines around Wellington, steam-hauled commuter trains were being replaced by electric multiple units. The Tawa deviation out of Wellington, opened in 1937, was built to accommodate catenary, and in the early 1950s, the Hutt Valley lines were electrified, displacing the WW and WAB tank engines. An event that many people will still remember most from the 1950s was the Tangiwai disaster of the 24th of December 1953, when the overnight Wellington to Auckland Express carrying 285 people plunged into the Wangaihu River at Tangiwai, north of Waihuru on the North Island main trunk. Only a matter of minutes before the train, consisting of KA 949 with 9 passenger cars and 2 vans, crossed the bridge, a torrent of water from the crater lake of Mount Ruapehu, roaring down the river, had swept away the concrete piles of the bridge, leaving no support when the train ran onto it. With the death toll of 151, the incident ranks as New Zealand's worst railway disaster and New Zealand's 5th worst recorded disaster. Along with the gradual disappearance of the steam locomotive, many rural branch lines disappeared with them. These scenes are of the junction of the 7-kilometre Waimate branch at Studham and the terminus at Waimate, which itself was the beginning of a longer line to Waihau Downs. Gradually, steam workings were replaced by diesels. The last regular steam run in the North Island came in October 1967, and the end in the South Island came on the 30th of October 1971, with the last steam hauling of an Invercargill to Christchurch Express. However, steam runs in the form of tourist lines such as the Kingston Flyer and enthusiast trips continue. These serve to remind how King Steam once dominated the rails and the lives of so many people in New Zealand.
Diesel locomotives first appeared in New Zealand before World War II in the form of TR-class shunters, of which more than 100 were acquired from 10 different builders between 1936 and 1978. All were of the four-wheel variety, except for 6 six-wheel versions. The first significant appearance of diesel traction, however, came in the form of the DS-class six-wheel shunters in 1949. These were followed by DE shunters in 1952, which were the first use of diesel-electric traction in New Zealand. Mainline diesels first appeared in 1954 with the 10-member DF class from English Electric, who also supplied the more numerous DG class variant the following year. These scenes show the DF class in action around the Bay of Plenty, including the old line through the Kurangahaki Gorge, now replaced with the Kaimai Deviation and Tunnel. American design and technology appeared in 1955 with the DA class. These were to be the most numerous diesel class to be used in New Zealand and dominated North Island traffic during the 1960s. They were finally withdrawn from service in 1989. The following film was made for New Zealand Railways in 1975 at a time when both its freight traffic and its employee payroll were at all-time peaks, thanks to government regulations which prevented road freight competition. In it, you'll see examples of the General Electric DX class from 1972, introduced for North Island main trunk traffic, and the Mitsubishi DJ class, introduced for South Island service in 1967.
New Zealand Railways, the country's largest transportation and freighting organisation. Over 21,000 people employed in a broad range of occupations. People from all walks of life. People with varied skills and aptitudes. People helping the railways prepare for its greater contribution to the economy. We look at one of the most important aspects of the railway system, its freight handling. The railway carries over 13.6 million tonnes of freight a year between 800 railway stations. It carries over a quarter of the total freight moved throughout New Zealand. An ever-increasing portion of this freight is being carried in containers. Goods from overseas are railed from the container terminals to destinations throughout the country, and containers of export cargo are railed back. Internal containers of general and frozen goods are carried throughout both islands. But containers are only one aspect of freight handling. The branch line between the timber mill at Kawarau and the forest head at Murapara. An average of 7 trains a day, approximately 34 wagons each, 1,000 tonnes a train. Nearly 2 million tonnes of logs a year.
Cement from the west coast. Over 250,000 tons a year carried for the construction industry of the nation. Coal. Loaded on the Westlands Rewanui Incline, New Zealand's steepest section of rail track. NZR carries over 1.25 million tons a year for industrial and domestic use.
It's a wee bit in the middle.
Salt, from Lake Grasmere in the South Island to supply the country's needs. Flour, bulk loaded directly from the mill at Timaru for the bakeries of the north. Goods traveling throughout the country, day and night. To sort the large volume of freight, the railways have special marshalling yards. The largest is just north of Hamilton. 48 kilometres of track, 210 sets of points. Te Rapa.
Now 262 away at 36. And 631, what's following 631? 257. No, not at the moment. They've pushed one road, but they're parked up again at the moment. 631, 202 at the moment. Okay.
The main trunk line from Frankton to Ngaruahia is controlled from the signal box. 44 sets of points, 72 signal lights. The box is manned continuously.
Plug in for 708 now. Logo. Thank you.
In the yard, incoming trains are broken up and wagons dispatched to destinations all over the North Island.
LA 22642, Penrose, Tuck.
Roger.
NN 87, empty.
Roger.
Nancy 817, empty.
Roger.
Van number F464, last one right down.
The wagons are propelled over a hump and allowed to run by gravity down to the various classification sidings. But Railways Freight isn't only trains. NZR operates 4 ferries to maintain the vital transport link between the North and South Islands. As well as passengers and vehicles, they carry over 1 million tons of freight a year. Link span berths allow for turnarounds of less than 1 hour. The ships make over 4,000 crossings annually. Over 13.5 million tons of freight a year. Over a quarter of the total freight moved in the country. The New Zealand Railways freight operation and the staff who run it are playing a vital part in the life of the community.
In 1966 came a small final delivery from English Electric, the DI class, built at the plant in Queensland. Apart from the DX, locomotives introduced in the 1970s were the 30-member new DF class heavy haulers from General Motors of Canada, as well as 85 rebuilt versions of the DA, the DC class. At the same time, 10 members of the lighter DB class were rebuilt, known as DBRs. Bogie shunters had appeared in the 1960s with the DSC class. In the late 1970s came the DSG class and the General Electric DH class. The most recent class of shunters were 5 single-engine versions of the DSG, known as the DSJs. By the mid-1980s, government protection for the railways was being abolished, and the competition was starting to bite, as these commercials show.
2 engines and a handful of men to haul 900 tons of timber out of the Kaingaroa State Forest. Laid end to end, that's about 46 kilometers of trees. An achievement not possible with anything less than a train. And an achievement that's successfully completed not once a month, but 6 times each day. When it comes to large hauls, nothing can take it like a train. We're the New Zealand Railways, and we're putting a great deal on the line. Last year, the New Zealand Railways came out to face the competition head on. We promised quicker arrival times, door-to-door deliveries, more efficient freight movement. And we delivered the goods. But there's more to come. More good news for freight users. More tough news for our competition. Because we're the New Zealand Railways, and we're putting a great deal on the line.
Rail cars first appeared in New Zealand before World War II, with 3 classes of between 6 and 9 members each. But the first main class of rail cars came in 1955 with the 35-member Fiat-type twin sets. These replaced all provincial steam-hauled passenger trains and dominated the scene for the next 2 decades. In 1972 came a 3-member long-distance luxury class of railcar known as the Silver Fern. After serving on the Wellington-Auckland run for nearly 20 years, they now provide services between Auckland and Hamilton and Auckland and Tauranga. The most recent rail cars to be introduced in New Zealand were 2 classes for Auckland suburban services, obtained second-hand from the Western Australian capital of Perth. These, totalling 19 2-car sets, had been made redundant there by electrification and arrived in Auckland in September 1993. In the late 1980s, long-distance passenger services in New Zealand were revamped, with the trains carrying their own catering and the cars made more comfortable with lambskin-covered seats, snack tables in between them, and fitted with large tinted observation windows. The trains are now known as the Overlander between Auckland and Wellington, the Bay Express between Wellington and Napier, the Coastal Pacific Express between Picton and Christchurch, the Transalpine Express between Christchurch and Greymouth, and the Southerner between Christchurch and Invercargill. Electric traction has also played a small but significant role in New Zealand Railways history. The first 5 English electric supplied locomotives appeared in 1923 for the 14 kilometres between Otira and Arthur's Pass in the South Island. They were replaced in 1968 with 5 from Toshiba of Japan. Next came 6 locomotives for the 10-kilometre Christchurch to Lyttelton line in 1929. These lasted until 1970. In the late 1930s, the 10-kilometre Wellington to Johnsonville and the 39-kilometre Wellington to Paikakariki lines in the North Island were electrified. And in 1955, the 38-kilometre Wellington to Upper Hutt line was also electrified. Locomotives and multiple units were acquired for these lines, as before, from the English Electric Company. By the late 1970s, the original multiple units were wearing out and were largely replaced by 44 new two-car units from Hungary. The locomotive classes, the EW and the ED, were redundant by the early 1980s and were withdrawn. A major project of the 1980s, however, was the electrification of the North Island main trunk central section for 412 kilometres between Palmerston North and Te Rapa. Accompanied by major deviation works, this project was completed in 1988, and 22 new Class EF locomotives now work most trains over this line.
An exciting new era in railways will begin soon. Trains will be clean and quiet, carry heavier loads, and arrive sooner. Most importantly, they'll use not one drop of imported fuel. This electrification booklet will arrive in your letterbox soon. It'll tell you of the dangers of playing, working and carrying loads too close to the 25,000-volt wires. Please read it carefully. We want electrification to be good for us all.
New Zealand railways have undergone considerable change in the last few years. The Railways Road Services Division was sold off in 1991, and then the rail operations, by then known as New Zealand Rail Limited, were themselves privatised in 1993. In October 1995, a new image was announced with the unveiling of the name Transrail for the company. Freight services are now known as Translink, the passenger services Transcenic, and the Auckland and Wellington suburban services as Transmetro. With this new image and new streamlined efficiency, New Zealand's railway operations face the challenges of the last years of the 20th century and beyond.